Industry Session 4, Decarbonizing India's Cooling Sector Through the Adoption of District Cooling and Other Cooling Technologies. The session is powered by Tabreed India. This session will be structured differently from the ones you've seen so far in an Oxford Union-style debate format to engage the speakers as well as the audience. The proposition will be speaking in favor of district cooling as well as other cooling technologies and how its deployment on a large scale can yield economic and ecological dividends. On the other hand, the opposition will focus on challenges related to the adoption of district cooling in India, along with how passive cooling and nature-based solutions is the need of the hour for providing thermal comfort. The session will be chaired by Mr. Sudhir Parla, Country Head, Tabreed India. Sir, welcome. In his current role, Sudhir is leading Tabreed's efforts to invest, own, and operate cooling assets as a utility to provide more sustainable long-term services in meeting the country's growing cooling demand. He's also actively involved with initiatives with the UNEP, UNESCAP, Integrated Urban Systems Partnership, and the Cool Coalition. In his previous roles, he was at PwC and Infosys. Welcome, Sudhir. And now for the proposition, Sandeep Kachava, Schooling Specialist, the GIZ PMU. Sandeep, hi. Sandeep is an energy efficiency researcher focusing especially on building energy efficiency and cold chains. Sandeep has co-authored the draft district cooling guidelines for India. He has contributed to the space cooling in buildings and cold chain and refrigeration chapters of the India Cooling Action Plan. While working closely with Niti Aayog and the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, he helped conceptualize India's periodic State Energy Efficiency Index. Sandeep, nice to have you with us. The other member of the proposition, Dr. Satish Kumar, he's stepping in for a colleague who couldn't make it. Dr. Satish Kumar, Executive Director and Founder, AEEE, Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy. Welcome, sir. And the proposition will be met by their opposition, Mr. Marcus Latner, International Director, Eurovent. Marcus has been working with the HVACR industry for almost 20 years. He manages the first international chapter of Eurovent in the Middle East, advocating for more energy efficiency and better indoor air quality. He has recently initiated the formation of Eurovent India to further knowledge transfer between India, the Middle East, and Europe. Marcus, welcome. And also on the opposition, Mr. Dushyant Ahuja, Vice President and Head, Asset Management, Tata Realty and Infrastructure Limited. Dushyant is a multi-talented professional with over 18 years of national and international experience in cost and change management, financial analysis, strategy consulting, and project management. At Tata Realty, Dushyant is responsible for managing their commercial assets across the country in terms of optimizing operations and leading innovations. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Industry Session 4, Decarbonizing India's Cooling Sector Through the Adoption of District Cooling and Other Cooling Technologies, and the session is powered by Tabreed India. We look forward to a heated debate. Thank you.
Thanks for setting the context, Akash. So I think as we are walking up, Satish said this should be a true Arnab Goswami style debate. And he said, that's the benchmark you have to make it a debate. And I said, I don't want that benchmark. I'll try and make it as close as possible to an Oxford Union style debate. And we'll just stay at that. And like he said, this is going to be basically a discussion between the proposition and the opposition, both arguing in favor and against what the House view is going to be. And the House view, I'll just kind of outline right now. And it will involve also participation of the audience. So I think what we'll do is, after I set out what we believe is the House view, of course, Tabreed being a district cooling company, you would know what the view is going to be like, right? And we'll have arguments for why it makes sense for India, and also arguments for why it doesn't make sense. And following that, we'll also probably open up for questions from the audience, and we'll basically see how convincing they've been in being able to either sway the view of the audience between believing this is the right way for India or not, right? So the view essentially is, I think we've spoken enough already of how cooling is more and more and more a necessity in India right now. It's not becoming, it's no longer a luxury. And we're at a point right now where demand aggregation is the only way to meet the climate goals of the country. And the more and more and more demand aggregation can happen, and then be met through sustainable systems like district cooling, the better it is, and the likelihood, and is the most viable pathway for India to meet its climate goals. And the only way India can meet its climate goals in some sense is through addressing cooling demand in a more sustainable way, and that can happen through district cooling. So that's the view of the House. I basically want to ask maybe the audience, just a show of hands, how many of you believe that this is the only most viable pathway for India to decarbonize the cooling sector or not? Who are for it? Wow. And who's against? I'm sure it's the rest. The ones against district cooling as the only, okay, not much. The rest are sitting on the fence basically, right? So I think, Satish, it's your job to make sure you either move them for or against, right? So great. I think let's start basically with the proposition team. I'll probably ask Sandeep to start by putting forth his argument on why he believes district cooling is the way forward for the country.
Hello, everyone. Now, to make the case for district cooling, I want to stick with basics. So I will talk about the key benefits that can be realized with the district cooling systems, how energy efficient and environment friendly this technology or this cooling solution can be. Now, to understand the benefits, first we have to see how the conventional or the traditional cooling systems are designed. So if you look at any large commercial building, the peak cooling load for which the cooling system is designed, it comes only for just 1% of the hour, 1% of the total operating hours. So what that means is for 99% of the operating hours, the cooling system is running on part load conditions. Now, one may argue that there are many strategies to optimize part load performance, like variable frequency drives or use of or staging of chillers. But the question is this the best utilization of the installed cooling capacity? And it is not just the chillers. There are cooling towers, there are a lot of pumps, then there is a lot of electrical infrastructure that goes along with these equipment. There are electrical switch gears, and then there is power backup, which comes in the form of DJ sets, and everything is designed for this peak load, which comes just for 1% of the hour. So, and it is not just, the problem is not just over yet. Typically, all these equipment, they are designed in an N+1 configuration. So what that means is there is always some standby spare capacity to run or ensure operations during any scheduled or non-scheduled maintenance shutdowns that may be required. So the takeaway is that there is a lot of redundant and capacity and associated capex that goes with conventional approach. Now let's see how district cooling can address some of these things. So if we take 10 such commercial buildings and which would otherwise have their own standalone cooling system, and also add a few residential towers and connect the entire campus with a district cooling system. So what happens with this aggregation of cooling loads, you can make use of the diversity, the natural diversity of cooling loads, which is always there. So what this diversity means, it is just the non-coincidence of cooling loads, which is always there. So in a building, not all the cooling loads, they come at the same time, and between buildings also, the chances of non-coincidence may be even more, and again, depending upon the type of building and the usage profile. So the benefit clearly is in terms of reduced installed cooling capacity, and it could be up to 30%. Then apart from the reduced installed cooling capacity, there is a reduction in the peak electrical load on the grid. And this comes not just from the reduced installed cooling capacity, it comes also from the use of thermal energy storage systems, which are integral with the district cooling system. Then the third main benefit is energy savings, of course. So these high efficiency chillers, which can run on on or near the best efficiency point, along with professional O&M, which can be sustained for a long time. These systems give you huge energy savings. Apart from this, there is an opportunity to do better refrigerant management. Some people say that the refrigerant leakages could be completely avoided, and there is an opportunity to use natural refrigerants also. So since the plant is located away from the livable spaces, so you can use natural refrigerants like ammonia, which people say have the safety concerns due to its toxicity. Apart from this, there are benefits associated with increased leasable area, because you have freed up a lot of the rooftop space and a lot of the basement space, so that could be monetized. And then there is reduction in the heat island effect. So with the unitary air conditioners, we see these hot pockets in the residential livable spaces. All of it could be moved away from the city with a centralized approach. And finally, one key benefit could be integration with existing utilities. So say you have a thermal power plant outside the city. So all the waste heat could power an absorption chiller, which can run your district cooling plant. It can be integrated with the STPs. It can be linked with any renewable captive plant, waste to energy, or other renewable. So in line of all these benefits, I feel district cooling is one of the most energy efficient and environment friendly solution that can be there for especially the large mixed use developments which have high cooling density.
Thanks for that, Sandeep. So I forgot to mention, I think this is going to be 4 minutes for each speaker. So you heard Sandeep's view. Aggregation helps. Through aggregating, you open up vectors for using other energy forms as well. And big picture-wise, to meet the growing demand of the country, the larger the system, the more better technologies can be deployed, the more cost-effective it can become, and the circular benefits you can bring into that. So what's your view on that, Dushyant?
Thanks, Sudhir. So I'm not going to disagree with anything that Sandeep has mentioned in terms of efficiencies, in terms of technology. All there, I agree. However, I do not believe that this is the most efficient way to move forward. There are other technologies, there are other passive measures that we can take where you would, in effect, not use the energy at all. Just as an example, your buildings, your shades can be designed using solar passive technology. The incoming heat, so currently one of my buildings in Gurgaon itself has an EPI of as low as 0.7, just because of the design we have set up. It's not just district cooling that's going to help us. We have to look at a holistic gamut of solutions, I would say. And to add to that, I would say there are a lot of regulatory and psychological challenges as well. Regulatory in terms of a district cooling system will only work if you combine multiple commercial buildings with residential buildings. Unfortunately, in India, commercial buildings are owned by multiple developers. So unless you really have a regulatory framework in place that forces the developers to work together, they will not. Coming down to residential, the residential market in India is primarily sale of flats, which increases your problems multifold as well. Because now you have to speak to 1,000 different individuals and make them agree that you should have a central cooling system, rather than letting them do what they need to do based on their own internal house designs. I recently looked at a beautiful villa that was created in South India, which is based on brickwork with the rat trap bond, which provides amazing insulation. It uses less cement, it uses less bricks, but it's not used anywhere. Why don't we go back to our traditional roots and really look at passive cooling systems? Why are we talking about increasing our plant sizes? We should be looking at decreasing the cooling load itself.
Great, thanks, Shant. I think I can see where the argument is going. So, Satish, it's now on your able shoulders to counter that view and go for district cooling.
Thanks, Sudhir. And I just want to build upon some of the arguments in favor of the district cooling system that Sandeep mentioned. So I'll also take a little bit of a macro view that why district cooling system in the context of India makes a lot of sense. If you look at our projected cooling demand, we know that this demand is going to increase by 8x as per the India Cooling Action Plan. And also what Dushyant mentioned, that it's not that district cooling system is the technology. We are not arguing about that. We are arguing about its applicability in the right situation, in the right development, and where we feel that it has an edge over conventional chiller systems or some of the other technologies that are deployed. So that is that's the first point that I would like to make. The second point is that district cooling system has been shown to work in much more milder climates and sometimes much more extreme climates than what India faces as well. So we have district cooling examples which is working well, if not in all the cases, in many cases in Middle East, in Southeast Asia, and even in cities like Paris and some other places. So what India can do is that we don't have to start from scratch. We can learn from these international experiences and try to improve upon them, because there are some deficiencies and there are some issues that have come up. So that's something that where India can have a jump start on this. The third piece is something that Sandeep alluded to, but which is, I think, in our course of work, something that we have seen is that maintenance of the central plant is not a trivial thing. It's almost like a headache. It's a perpetual firefighting mode in which these central plant people are, because there are a lot of consumer complaints coming through about, oh, this is too cold, this is too hot, or we don't have too much air. And if you actually consolidate all of this and transfer it to a well-trained, well-qualified professional who are not distributed over, say, 20 large buildings, but in one central plant, then there is a greater likelihood that some of these problems can be minimized. So that is going to free up very, very precious resources and manpower requirement, which bogs many real estate developers or rental rental properties. Some of the large organizations, they have a dedicated facilities team which is working on this. So some of this can be delegated to professionals who are specializing in this. So that's my another point. The fourth point that I would mention is that real estate developers can also benefit from cooling as a service model. We have heard about like what does cooling as a service mean, and in my opinion, district cooling offers like the epitome of like what it can mean if it is designed well, if it is operated well, if the tariff structures and these things are designed properly. So there is a real opportunity again to go to the experts, to go to the people like who are trained to run these plants very, very well and do it in a manner where your core competencies are focused on, I think, where you want to work, and some of these services can actually be delegated to the experts who are well trained to provide these services. And the last thing that I would say is Sandeep alluded to the peak load, the aggregation of the load that this allows. And when we are working in the cooling area, and when we are looking at its implication on the power system, the designing and the demand flexibility requirement, I feel this is a very, very big argument, because from a DISCOM perspective, it's very hard to run a program with, like, say, hundreds of a residential customer, or like 15 or 20 commercial customer. But if there is a district cooling provider who can actually work with the DISCOMs in terms of working out how to flex the demand in peak load times, and how to shift the demand also by pre-cooling the building, which are designed for, I think, these kind of interventions, that becomes another very, very important thing that district cooling systems can enable. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Satish. I think all very clear, powerful arguments. Now, Marcus.
Yeah, hello. Very good arguments, and I also would not like to counter them specifically, but there is one.
You would lose
for
them.
me
If you don't counter, you would be losing.
No. There is one very core aspect in this: is district cooling is not a new technology. It's not a disruptive technology. It's the same as the conventional technology we use everywhere around the world. It's a chiller, it's a cooling tower, and you have the piping, the pumps, etc. So when we are talking about district cooling, we cannot assume per se that we are using a new technology which will change our approach to cooling at all. It's a business model, and it's economy of scale. And in this environment, we have to be very careful how we approach this business model. Overall, as a society, as governments, we want to motivate the people to reduce their energy consumption. And I'm there totally on your side. We should really try our way better in the future to build our environment in a way which is not increasing our cooling loads. If I have a business model which depends on the consumption of cooling, then do I have the motivation to actually go and see how I can reduce this consumption, especially if I need a certain level of consumption to make the whole operation viable, financially feasible? That's the one aspect. The second aspect is that it needs, and this has been showing all around the world, specifically in the Middle East, it needs a really good regulatory framework. The point is, we need to motivate everyone, every consumer, to reduce the use of air conditioners if it's not really necessary. If I'm stuck in an apartment and I have to pay a monthly subscription fee to pay for my cooling, even if I'm not home, even if I don't want to use air conditioner, I'm not motivated to reduce it. And I have no personal savings, no personal gains, no personal benefits out of it. There are ways we can set this business model up to make that work, but it has to be really carefully thought through. Otherwise, we do not give the consumer a choice. And not the choice between, do I want to install a room air conditioner, or do I go with a central air conditioning system or a district cooling system, but the choice of, do I need cooling? We are around daily, we have seasons. There are days I don't need it. And every person has a different comfort level. So one person wants to use an AC when the room temperature goes above 24. Another one is completely fine. But this individual choice needs to be guaranteed, and this can only be guaranteed by a really good, sound regulatory framework. So economy of scale can work, and the arguments on operation, on maintenance are very, very valid. But we have to make sure that we don't push cooling suddenly into a business model where I get more profits and more financial gains as a provider by selling more and by driving cooling demand even higher than by the opposite, by reducing it.
All right. So I think before we go into rebuttals of each other, just to summarize, like I said, the view of the house is India is already on a pathway towards cooling demand growing rapidly. Now, that's a pathway that we already see happening right now in front of us. Of course, if people can change their consumption patterns and usage pattern and how buildings are built, that's great, right? Within the construct of what we already are doing and the way we are living, we're looking at alternatives. So the view was, in this alternative, under this pathway, aggregating demand through district cooling is the most viable way, and that's what the proposition team was arguing for. Your view was it's not practical, it may not work in the construct of India. There needs to be much better planning, there is much better regulation, right? And there needs to be much better, and it may not be a solution suitable for all cases, essentially, right? So if I give a chance now, Satish and Sandeep, for your rebuttal for the view that they have, where it's all about why, if buildings are designed better, there are more passive solutions, more nature-based solutions, then you don't need district cooling, then the demand eventually comes down. When the demand comes down, you can just have much better alternatives at a building level. So that's the view of the opposition. So if you have to argue against that, what would your view be?
I think our philosophy from ever since we started working on the cooling demand assessment or the India Cooling Action Plan has been to follow this lean, mean, green approach. So whatever the cooling technology or solution that we want to implement, first we have to cut down on the cooling demand. That is a must and a non-negotiable aspect of it. So rep bond or other forms of passive measures to cut down on the heat load, that should be done whether we are doing district cooling or not. And if that is done, then even that will help to cut down the cooling demand even more. So, that's, to me, not a argument against district cooling, but we are together on this.
So maybe I'll also go and we will team up. So a couple of things. So I think as Sandeep mentioned, an even cooling action plan, the first step is to, I think, cut down on the cooling load, no matter which technology we are using. So that's a given. Use insulation, use shading, use better glazing. That has to be done. There are building energy codes, there are green buildings, everybody is proposing that. So that's not up for debate. That's whether you use a split air conditioner or a chiller or like a district cooling, that has to be done. How do you design your buildings, or how do you retrofit your buildings to reduce the cooling load is the challenge. I think we have a Solar Decathlon India program where we are trying to train the next generation of architects and engineers on doing that. But what we feel is that the way the current design and I think the construction industry is organized, it is not a very scalable way to do this. If big developers are in a hurry to design something, they are more likely to go for conventional building construction techniques. So again, I feel that it's good to talk in terms of conceptual arguments and in terms of a little bit of an idealized scenario. But we heard yesterday that India, the pace at which India is developing, nobody is going to stop and say that, hey, we will wait and then this technology come or better designers come and then we will do that. So in that circumstances, I think what is to be done, and that's why we feel all these things become important. The third thing I would say that the aesthetics of the building, there are many architects probably in the room, and we are all horrified to look at cityscapes where all the cooling reports you see these split air conditioner outdoor units sticking out of the building and completely butchering the cityscape, I think. Is that the kind of like beautiful cities and this thing that we want to design? So here again, we feel that if we combine maybe like residential as well as commercial development in some of the utilities, it can actually help not just with the ecology and with the economics, but with the aesthetics of it also. And the last thing I would say that Marcus, you talked about that some people may not want to have cooling. So I'll just give you a number. If we take like cooling degree days as 3,000 cooling degree days in India, with a proper base. And if you multiply that with 1.35 billion people, so you are looking at 4 trillion person cooling degree days that is there in India. That's a fact that we cannot deny. And for people to request that, oh, it's 45 degrees Celsius and you should not have access to air conditioning, or you design it in a manner, I think yes, these things can be done, but the reality is that these are very, very extreme tropical climate conditions that we are living in, and we will have to go for some of these economies of scale, as you yourself mentioned, which will make it, I think, a more, I would say, pertinent, as well as probably in terms of, I think, giving options to the developers, that there is another option, as you yourself are saying, which cooling as a service, you don't have to worry about. You don't have to worry about real estate space. I think you design a heat exchanger and you do the plumbing in that fashion, and that will take care of the things. And many people may say that, hey, I'm willing to pay a premium because it takes a lot of headache out of my kind of domain. And that's probably something that we need to look at. Thank you.
Right.
So one quick point on Marcus's argument that district cooling is disincentivizing cooling consumption. So, I mean, probably that is coming from the Middle East, and if we have to do it in India, we cannot follow the same template. We have to evolve our own regulations around it, and basically we cannot, that template will not work in India. That's a learning, and we cannot repeat the same mistake again.
So you've heard the point. We are consuming what we're consuming. We've gone past the tipping point of saying we don't need air conditioning, or we can do passive technologies and so on. Why not do it with district cooling? And your view against that?
Certainly. So Dr. Satish, I think we agree that we need to reduce our cooling demand. That's one thing that I would say the entire panel agrees on. However, and you mentioned that it's an idealistic scenario where you have passive cooling and don't need air conditioning, I would tend to disagree. I have a large park in Chennai, which is currently India's first LEED net zero park. The only reason I was able to get a net zero certification on that park was because of the passive designs we have there. Our air conditioning loads are extremely low. They're, I think, almost at 60% of other buildings within the same area, which you can't do with a district cooling plant. And unfortunately, the regulatory standpoint still remains. We do not have a plan forward. Our cities currently are not planned. If we have a new city coming up, definitely we should go for district cooling in that city. But the current cities don't allow you to set up that infrastructure. It's not possible to say that in Bangalore, entire North Bangalore will have a district cooling plant. You can't have that. You don't have the ability to even add that infrastructure there. So in effect, you need to look at reducing the demand. You need to look at alternative ways in which cooling is going to be done, or maybe not required at all. Bangalore has beautiful weather. Unfortunately, the way the buildings have been constructed there, the temperatures are increasing. It's becoming more and more hotter, I would say. But there are ways to go back and reduce those things again. And I don't see district cooling as a solution for those right now.
I would say again, Middle East has made this experience. I think the regulatory frameworks were not appropriate when they started to develop and implement district cooling in the Middle East, and after a couple of years, a certain frustration has made ground among the regulators, among the providers, among the consumers. And one of the mistakes made has been that the subscription model, the contracts were based on floor space and not on actual consumption. So people who were not even using it still had to have to pay quite a substantial amount, and it became extremely expensive. That led that the people did not really want to take apartments in a district cooling residential buildings. So buildings were not fully occupied. In the peak seasons, in summer when it's really hot, you have an exodus of people. So even at the peak, the cooling load was not used as its peak, leading to subsequent losses, financial losses on the provider side. So the overall experience has led the regulators to look back into the frameworks. There are now measurements put in place that the relationship between the end user, the utility providers, the service providers, and the billing companies are put on a new into a new context. It's not to be said that district cooling should not be used. Again, it's a viable model, no question. I assume that in India you will find a lot more locations where it actually really makes sense, because you have a much higher population density, thus a much higher cooling requirement in certain locations. But it has to be really very well calculated up front. You can imagine you have a lot of variables you have to take into account: the nature of the locations, the nature of the businesses operating there. If you mix it up with a location where you have to provide a stable cooling service all year round, like a data center cooling, all these things have to be taken very well into account and calculated. And this last, my last argument is like, this will define how the people will consume cooling. I know that, I mean, I'm living half of the year in Dubai. If you have a harsh environment, no question, but still, I would cut off the air conditioning at a much higher temperature than some locals would, because they love to be really chilled at 16 degrees. And this needs to be reflected also in my bills. If I conserve, I need to see the saving. If somebody makes profit by increasing the consumption and providing more cooling load, then we have the risks, because the end user, the end consumer, is always the weakest part in the chain. Public-private partnerships are a wonderful thing, but in this case also risk that nobody will take care of the end user, and the end user has to pay the price.
Yeah, right, Marcus. So I think the key, what you're saying is, district cooling creates monopolistic tendencies, and when there are monopolistic tendencies created, it removes the power away from the end user, as a result of which they're dependent on them, and you end up having regulated tariffs which make it more expensive and more challenging for them, right? Great. Okay, so I think we've heard a bit of discussions on both sides in terms of why it's required for India, where India is right now on its cooling journey, and why it's not practical, or why there are alternatives or passive solutions as well. I think what you mentioned, Bangalore, is absolutely relevant and valid. Maybe what I thought is we'll just spend 5-10 minutes basis what we've heard, asking the audience for any set questions that you'd like to either, more than clarify, I would say target towards the proposition team or the opposition team in terms of strengthen the argument, or at least understand a bit more in terms of what they have to say.
So,
yes, Dheeraj?
Sudhir, I would rather try to put you on spot, because I would like to ask you a question. You appear to be on neither side. So the question comes to
I don't want that, but yeah, go ahead.
I heard Dushyant saying that the existing infrastructure and the existing assets, what we have, with the current layout of the cities or the towns, it's very difficult, or to a certain extent impossible, to incorporate district cooling. While the benefits are to be seen for sure, because he also mentioned that in new cities it should be planned. My question to you is, you being from an expertise, having that expertise and from that field, do you think the statement when he makes that in the existing towns or cities it's not possible or difficult, do you think there's a way by which we can still do it if there is a merit in it?
Sure. So I think my view is, of course, what is fundamental is the lean mean strategies that are already mentioned. Reducing demand is absolutely paramount. The more and more and more you can reduce the amount of cooling demand, the better it is, right? Once that's done, I think in some sense, however hard the challenge is, because if you see within a city environment, an urban environment, most of the utilities that are currently that you're using, whether it's sewage, whether it's water, whether it's power and so on, in any case, infra needs to be put in for that, right? We are kind of living with those right now. It's not like we won't say we don't need power, we don't need a sewage network and so on and so forth. A district cooling system, even if it's put in by force in a very congested location, absolutely accelerates the possibility for circularity. You don't need to have such large sewage networks. The sewage networks can go to a STP right there to produce that. It can give viability to municipal solid waste because you can get two output streams, energy as one, along with cooling as another output stream. So then you don't need as much of trucks plying around for sewage, for solid waste. You reduce the power demand substantially, so the cabling required, the substations required comes down substantially. CGDs are not getting anchor demand. CGDs get anchor demand as well, so that gives viability for that as well. So suddenly, with one cohesive infrastructure element, which is cooling, you give viability to a number of other sectors. You reduce, of course, the amount of infra required for everything else. And then within the sum total of all of that, now it's a question of whether balancing cost, balancing environmental considerations, and balancing what a city needs to be doing for planning this. Why not do this as well, right? So I think it's more a question of it needs to be done, how do we get about doing it, than say, India, we can't do it. That's my view, essentially.
Hi, this is Shalu from CEW. My small question is related to the insights that are coming from China, that buildings that are centrally cooled, they inevitably consume much more energy, cooling energy, as compared to buildings which are part cooled, mainly because the consumers there have the flexibility of operating systems only when required and only cooling the parts that they are occupying. So the fundamental question is, which then will lead to district cooling, that should we even be designing at scale centralized cooling systems? And if that's a no, then to what extent should we have district cooling systems?
Sandeep.
So I think Sandeep also made this point that what kind of cooling demand district cooling system is going to displace. And the bulk of the cooling demand where this district cooling system is going to be applicable is going to be in central plant kind of situation. So office buildings, hotels, hospitals, airports, these kind of things. Especially, I think, in Asia and Southeast Asia, the reason this split air conditioner becomes a technology of choice is for the reasons that you are saying. But if that is coupled with the anchor loads that are going to come from larger commercial buildings, then this question becomes a little bit moot in my point. And the other point that I would also make is, and we were discussing this in our briefing call, that is the technology available where you size the system properly for a district cooling system plant, and if you don't need cooling at a certain point of time, for instance, somebody is going for a summer vacation and is not going to be using cooling in his or her apartment, then is it possible for a DCS system to turn off through better controls and through better sensing and diagnostics that, okay, this person is not available, let us not cool this area. And I think technology is available. The revenue model and other things that are getting talked about, because we are looking at cooling as a service, so the infrastructure company may say that, hey, there is a sunk cost and we will charge a minimum demand irrespective of whether you use this or not. But those are the trade-offs, in my opinion. Some people may be willing to make those trade-offs and say, hey, for the peace of mind that we get, I think, yeah, I'm willing to make these trade-offs. Otherwise, you have to get your split air conditioner serviced. We have so many instances where the derating of these appliances is significant over its lifetime of 8 to 10 years. It's running at probably 50% of, I think, what you bought. So I think there are no right or wrong answers, but I think these are some of the nuances that we need to look at.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I am A.K. Jain, urban planner. I heard both the sides, and I think there is no need for debate. What I learned from the narratives of both sides, there is a range of passive and active measures which are to be taken for cooling of a city. We cannot just say that these are the technical energy efficiency or net zero are the solutions, but I think passive solutions are very important. For example, preparation of the heat mitigation plan, green roofs, landscape, vegetation, etc. And of course, the active measures include the energy efficiency, maybe wind flow, EAT, earth air tunnel, things like that. So I think that there has to be a kind of trade-off or a balancing between the two sides rather than defining the problems in black and white. So my question is, do you come together for this kind of approach?
So if I got the question right, what you're saying is it should be a combination of both, not one versus the other. I think here it is a debate. It has to be one versus the other. So just for the sake of the argument, I think, I mean, what we're saying is, given where India is right now, what can be the most viable pathway in a time-bound manner to meet our climate goals, right? Given that cooling demand is one of the largest driver of energy demand anyways. Within that construct, I mean, the argument for is do it in scale, do it with district cooling. The argument against is no, that's not going to work. But basically, you could look at alternatives which are in bits and pieces, passive, and so on and so forth, to still meet our climate goals. So that's where we are at. So I don't think we're talking of both together. I'm sure both can converge, but the idea is, I mean, which is more viable in the current scenario that we are in, right? And so maybe anything to add to that in terms of why you believe your way can and is the most viable way? There are alternatives, of course, but where we are as a country, is this the most viable pathway for us ahead?
Certainly. I think I'd just like to add one more point there on while in a long-term basis, district cooling systems might work, but when it comes to viability, when it comes to timelines, I don't think we have the time right now to set up the regulatory framework, set up the psychological conditions which would allow for a district cooling system to come in. I remember discussing with Tabreed on one of our projects, a township project which we are planning in Bangalore, where we have commercial as well as residential loads. Unfortunately, the market demand for residential simply said, no, we do not want a district cooling system. And that's where the psyche of the consumer comes in. That's where developers can't go against what the people want. So I don't think it's really going to work out on at least a short-term basis.
Makes sense, absolutely. Thanks.
I would say that we have to look at all solutions and find a good combination. In a fast-developing country like India, I agree specifically I mentioned before on this factor of operation and maintenance. You may not be fast enough to train and educate enough numbers of people in a short time to handle the growing cooling demand. So here is a really big advantage of the district cooling side. You can come in, you can build up capacity for these professions. Your example shows clearly that the consumer is of a big relevance. And I guess people should not underestimate the negative feedback a lot of Indian experts perhaps reported back to home. So here, this is why I said the regulatory framework needs to be very, very well defined. And I would say district cooling is definitely makes sense in the right environment, in the right locations, when you have everything in place what you need to make it financially viable without putting overburden pressure on the consumers. Be very careful to not repeat certain mistakes from the past, that people see it as a business and you have suddenly all sorts of companies rushing in and start up a district cooling plant because they believe they can make money with it. So cooling should always be regarded not as a money-making machine, but as a, like as a responsibility from certain institutions and organizations.
Sure. Just maybe one.
We have few more questions, but I think, would you mind if we take those offline?
Okay, okay. Since we are on,
Because
okay.
there are quite a few questions that...
One last, and then we could do that.
One last, sure.
Hi, I'm Gopal Naria from BSCS Delhi. We are in electricity distribution business. I just wanted to just put one or two insight in particularly this topic, why it is essential for us. One important fact for Delhi city is that there is no land for new establishment or new scale society development. The only option available with us is to bear the existing, the old buildings and everything we have. Now we have to manage, we have to find the way within the existing, the setup we have, the city, everything we planned, or whatever it is, unplanned or whatever it is. So now the biggest challenge with us is to meet the demand. Now see, it's not only a commercial consideration. If somebody will give me $1 billion, I am not able to establish a power distribution capacity because there is no land. The same problem we are also facing. Like there is no planning for utility needs, right? The second consideration is the way people are installing air conditioning unit cooling machine is, it's just a ridiculous way because they don't have options. If you come and visit the Nehru Place market where we have our head office, just in front of two machines, there are a lot of machines are installed. They are simply a wastage of energy in the sense they are simply reducing efficiency of each other machines. Instead of cooling, it is just wasting energy. So there is the biggest case for energy efficiency in this particular the suggestion of district cooling. The second is the limitation of resource in terms of land and right of way for building a new infrastructure for power utility. There is no space available. If you look at the master plan being prepared by center and state government 2047, they simply state at the present CAGR LNG growth rate, we are going to need around 30,000 megawatt distribution capacity in Delhi city. Today, we have only 14,000 distribution capacity at sub-transmission level, state utility level. At distribution utility level, it is equally same capacity, but today we don't have solution to so many consumer need. There are huge momentum because of lot of new initiative from central government, state government, and the initiative for migration from fossil fuel to the electrical energy. We are not sure how we are going to meet out these all demands. There is no option left with us, but we have to find some solution where we can build a case for demand management as well as energy efficiency.
Absolutely.
And one or two, yesterday we had a very good discussion with Marcus. I learned a lot of insight because we were planning to have one pilot of district cooling in particularly Nehru Place area. This area consumes around 50 megawatt power in peak time. And almost 50% of it, even more than 50% is a cooling load. And that contributes to the peak hour in Delhi. Now there is no space for increasing this capacity. But the demography available in Nehru Place is, it has a lot of commercial shops. There are 3 metro stations. There are big hotels. Almost 50 different hotels are available in the vicinity. There are many corporate offices, and even residential area is very close to it. So that we are just interested to facilitate the district cooling company or any agency who is interested to make one pilot in the India or in the national capital
Great.
So that we can evaluate it whether it has any merits before we roll out for the other year. Similarly, as a utility, we know where the consumers' demand is coming from, where is the growth. So there are a lot of pockets within the Delhi city where there are opportunities are available.
Great, actually, and I think that's
there needs little bit different consideration rather than a view from Google Map whether there is a land available for setting up, whether
Sure.
we are going to modify existing structure or not. But
Agreed.
we have to live with the existing setup and we have to find out some solution for this.
Completely agree, and that's a great closing kind of a question and also a response in terms of why we are at a point where we need this. So maybe what we'll do is just to wrap up in the next 5 minutes. We've heard enough of to and fro and also points from the audience. Maybe if I just give 1 minute each to the proposition and the opposition. Okay, I wanted to poll after the closing statement, but I think people have heard enough, so done. Having heard what we've heard, if we go back to the view of the House, that the most viable pathway from where India is right now to meet its growing cooling demand is through adopting larger scale district cooling systems. And that is the most viable pathway. I'm not saying the only pathway. How many believe for? Okay, at least a lot more hands going up, great. And how many are still against and don't believe that this is the most viable pathway? Awesome. So I think it looks like the proposition team has won the argument. Congrats, Satish and Sandeep. And the irony is actually we have two very strong proponents sitting on the opposition side, but otherwise, I mean, still, you put forward a good argument. Thanks, Dushyant and Marcus. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sudhir, for so ably chairing this debate. Satish, Sandeep, Marcus, Dushyant, thank you very much.